This is Family Like the Ghost. We have Tryst on the line.
Yeah, hello.
Oh, great. So I just want to do a little introduction. Family Like the Ghost, we are indie artists ourselves, but we've been doing this podcast since 2018. We interview indie artists from around the world, and we have Tryst from New York City on the line.
Hey.
Oh, great.
Sorry, just trying to set up my microphone here. Now I can hear you better.
Okay, great. So your website talks about how you you bring the blood and lipstick wrapped up in dark and gritty noir world, and that you kind of have a convergence of burlesque and macabre undertones. And your new album, Vulgar Virtue, takes you on a journey of mystery for the enigmatic mind. And some of the artists that you're inspired by are Nine Inch Nails, Depeche Mode, Pink Floyd, The Cure, Kate Bush, David Bowie, many, many more. And then the art of, producers and film directors like David Lynch, Stanley Kubrick, and Salvador Dali.
Yeah.
So that's really cool influences.
There's a lot going on there.
Well, I respect that. The name of my band is a Phantom Electric Ghost, so I'm kind of drawn by similar types of cinematic, imagery. I actually wear like a Phantom costume and a Phantom mask when I do my show. So I'm into theatrics myself. So I appreciate anybody that has.
Like before, go to the grocery store. I literally looked like the Invisible Man. So.
Well, I think everybody's starting to look a little like a phantasm.
I'm kind of into it.
Yeah, so it's cool that you have this really cool stage persona that that you name check. David Bowie, who was like very famous for his personas, and Kate Bush, who had worked miracles with her work and imagery with people like Peter Gabriel in the past. So that's really cool. So I'll get into the questions I sent you.
Yeah.
So when did you first get into music? Like what age?
So I remember as far back as being 3 years old. I always say this was my first musical memory. I was like 3 years old, and I was in my old Queens apartment at my parents', little tiny apartment. MTV was on, and I remember Under the Bridge by Red Hot Chili Peppers and Losing My Religion by R.E.M. were like my favorite songs. And then I was like into like Never Gonna Get It by En Vogue.
Oh, that's very
diverse taste at a young age.
Very diverse taste.
And then I remember like another early memory for me was being like 7 years old, and my father was watching Pink Floyd's The Wall. I think it was like on cable. It was like on VH1 or something. And I remember seeing bits and pieces of it, and it scared the crap out of me. The first scene I remembering was the animation, of course, and then the famous scene that I probably no 7-year-old kid should be watching, but the kids going into the meat grinder during.
Oh yeah, that's pretty heavy stuff for a young kid.
Yeah, well, listen, at a young age, I always was kind of different and into like the more weirder, darker things, even though I was, dressed up in children's clothing. I always was just into more of the stranger things and music. I was really into like, New Order. And when I was like, 12 years old, I remember teachers like, how do you know all this 80s music and Depeche Mode and all that? So I've really been,
that's cool.
Yeah, I've been raised on all different types of music just from my parents. And then I got into like, Nine Inch Nails my own way when I was probably like 14. And I will say one more thing. Another early music memory I have is being probably like 5 or 6 years old. And I used to always go through my aunt's like cassettes that she had at the time. So this is like 1995, let's say. And I remember seeing The Downward Spiral on cassette. And for some reason, I just was so drawn to it. And the cassette itself was like that squishy, fancy kind of packaging. And I don't know why. I was so drawn to it. And then that ended up to this day is like my favorite album of all time. Like my biggest inspiration.
That's interesting. I actually saw Nine Inch Nails at Woodstock. The Woodstock where Green Day was throwing mud.
Yes, Woodstock 94.
Yeah, I was actually there, and I saw Trent Reznor that night. And as a musician, I mean, I grew up. I'm in my 50s, so I'm kind of I'm into bands like, Yes and Genesis, the Peter Gabriel Genesis,
Yeah.
and Emerson, Lake and Palmer, stuff like that. I'm a keyboardist, so
Nice.
that's kind of where I come
Okay,
from.
cool.
But Trent Reznor, he really reinvigorated my belief in synths.
Yeah.
When I saw him with his Moog, mini Moogs, mixing it with the guitars and the way he approached it, because New Age stuff like New Order, I was into Joy Division, which is the band that
yeah. Love
predates,
Joy Division.
yeah, Unknown Pleasures. It's like I still play it all the time.
I was listening to that the other night.
Yeah, and it's just like, Disorder is probably one of my favorite songs. I'm a keyboardist. I'm always trying to get the sound of that track Disorder to be like what I kind of drive when I'm playing my Moogs and my Rolands, and that's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, that really is. That album is great, and I also was listening to, because I love, like, I'm so inspired by 80s goth music. I love, like, The Cure, Sisters of Mercy. Even though it's funny, I don't think they label themselves as goth, but I mean, like,
yeah.
I mean, the only time you could listen to Sisters of Mercy is at night, and you have to have like 20 candles lit, and that's it. That's the
I used
best
to listen
way.
to, like Echo and the Bunnymen.
Yeah.
And, I was really into that. I was really into New Order. Depeche Mode I was into. And, I was always into synth bands like The Cure.
Yeah.
I was always trying to get my little basement band. We were doing like tons of stuff from Head in the Door. That's where I totally was like enthralled with that record.
Disintegration is definitely my favorite Cure album.
Yeah, that one really kind of shows the synth pop, new age wave, like post new wave stuff. Yeah. But yeah, I don't know. I was always drawn to Head in the Door just because of the melodies and stuff. But
rewinding though, you mentioned Woodstock. That I was actually watching that whole thing yesterday, and I mean, that always has been my favorite performance. The first performance I saw from that show, I remember I had to be probably like 15, and this is like when, like, I guess YouTube was just like coming out, so you were able to like find all this stuff, and I was obsessed with their performance of Happiness and Slavery, where he just like starts like trashing the keyboards and like dry humping them. And
it's kind of like
that half their stuff wasn't working, so he was like pissed off. So he was just like wrecking.
Yeah, they were just slamming it around, and people were throwing mud, and it was like raining. So probably it's not good for rain to be hitting Jupiters.
But it's like their best performance. It's so raw. It's so gritty.
Yeah.
Even though the sound like shit, like it just worked.
Well, when I was there, I mean, the power of it, even though they weren't able to get exactly what they wanted to come through, I mean, the guitars were coming through. And the keyboards they got to work were coming through, and its sound was just unbelievable. I was like really close. I was like really close to the main stage. I stayed there, all day, all night. Had my little, with 4 or 5 of my friends, we were all camped out, and it's just that experience. I was a musician when I went there, and I was a young musician. I had my basement bands and stuff, and we were just totally drawn into it. And I'm in my 50s. If you think about it, a kid in my age, we were all trying to re-experience the original Woodstock.
Yeah,
and that's why we went there.
I wish I could experience that. There's a really good documentary about that actually on Netflix. And
it was just an amazing thing to see so many great bands. Green Day, and they had some really awesome bands there. Some of the old bands that had been the original were there, and it was just really cool to see people really being pushed by people who play instruments and music, and really are great artists. And I always drawn to that. I've always been drawn to singer-songwriters, like when I'm talking to indie people like yourself. So like, how long have you been working on music since you were kind of your father kind of got you into and your parents got you into it, or you started getting into it?
Yeah, I was actually originally a dancer. That was what I was raised with. I was a dancer for a long time, and then when I got into my angsty teenage years, I was like, screw this, rock and roll. So I actually didn't start playing music until I was about 19, and I've had a few bands I've been in before, but the last probably like 5 years I've been just solo and just really just focused on like exactly what I want. And this album, I worked with another producer beforehand, And we did some really great stuff together. His name was Michael Spivak, and I was trying to do a little bit more. I was trying to do more like pop meets like Nine Inch Nails and
Oh,
Depeche
so you're
Mode.
doing a little bit more pop
I was doing
oriented
more.
keyboard.
But it was still dark. You know what I'm saying? You can actually find an old video called "Another Star" on my YouTube channel. It was more trip hop, a little bit more of a lighter sound, because I was just experimenting. I was doing such darker stuff for so long, and I do really love pop music though. Like I love Madonna. You know, I love just you name it. So, even freaking Spice Girls I grew up on as a kid. You know, so I've always been surrounded by pop music as well, and I love so many types of music. I love blues, I love jazz, I listen to classical, I listen to doo-wop, I listen to 60s, 70s, like literally everything. And I truly love it all. I don't listen to stuff that is bad. I would say.
No, I think what I've interviewed about 35 bands in the last 2 years, and one of the things I noticed is a lot of indie artists, they're cross genre, and everybody's pulling. In this age, this is kind of like the age of like you can pull in jazz, you can pull in new wave. People are bringing new wave back. People are going and finding the old Prophet Fives and Jupiter Eights.
I think the goth scene's kind of coming back too. The goth music,
and it's all coming
that are like really good. Like newer.
Yeah, because it's just a lot of the synth manufacturers that went out of business, Moog and Prophet, they had created the keyboards that made the sound of bands like Duran Duran and The Cure.
I used to love
came
Duran
from like
Duran as a kid.
Well, yeah, I mean Nick Rhodes played a Jupiter 8. The sound of Duran Duran comes from the Roland analog polysynth, the Jupiter 8, right? The Jupiter 8 is known as one of the greatest new wave synths next to the Prophet 5. Nice. And the reason, as a musician, is they were polyphonic analog synths that made these big fat chords. And so when you played them, they weren't just like the Moogs. Moogs are great for bass lines and leads. But the whole thing about the new wave is the fact that he had these bands playing these Jupiters, and they were playing these Prophet 5s and Oberheims. And these synths made very big fat chords that you hear in bands like Depeche Mode and The Cure and New Order. You hear those sounds, and they're not digital. And the reason they sound so fat is because they're analog, and that's what makes the 80s sound that way. And I was always drawn into that.
Depeche Mode's like one of those bands that I've seen probably Nine Inch Nails and Depeche Mode live the most out of any bands I've seen, and I swear to God, I totally like when you think of like Beatlemania, like with girls like fangirling. That's how I am when I go to a Depeche Mode show. Or a Nine Inch Nails show, and I was so lucky because a few years ago I was in Vegas. I saw Nine Inch Nails 2 nights back to back. We went the first night, and I woke up the next day. I was like, let's go again, and I found tickets literally like $150 cheaper than what I had originally bought the night before for. Same floor, general admission. I was like, screw it, let's go. And I saw Depeche Mode that same year. And I literally, like 2 hours before the show, a friend of mine that I knew, I already had tickets. She literally gave me floor tickets right on the barricade. So I was like, probably like 5 feet away from Dave God. And I was like, oh my God, it was unbelievable. It was like the best concert experience I ever had. I'm like at the point in my life where I'm like, you know what? Life's too short to buy cheap concert tickets. Even though like I bought nosebleeds, and every time I buy them, I'm just like, damn it, I should have just splurged for the better seats.
Yeah, well, it's just like when you get to see your heroes. I mean, I saw the Who. I'm a big fan of the Who. I saw the Allman Brothers, and like I said, I kind of in my 50s, so some of those classic bands I always wanted to see, and I did see them.
I saw Roger Waters a few years ago too. That was amazing.
And I saw a couple Prince concerts, actually, and he was like unbelievable. He's on par. Like if you ever saw, people just think he was like a pop star, but he was like a rocker. I mean, I saw him at Paisley Park in Minneapolis. And I saw him. I saw him play with a trio, right? And he had a bass player and a drummer, one of his MPG drummers and his bass player, and they played like a Hendrixian set. and they were doing like Hendrixian like lines and blues, like Hendrix or Santana, and it sounded just like that. And a lot of people don't realize how great a player he was in terms of that. I mean, they hear Purple Rain, but they don't know how deep he can get. And you know, I was a Prince head, so I used to go see him when I was in Minneapolis. I used to go to the park, and you'd have to be there at like 3 a.m. Well, you get there at midnight, and he wouldn't get on the stage till 3.
Yeah.
and he would actually play all these bootleg songs, all these like unreleased songs. You'd be sitting there
he didn't give a crap about anything. He was just he was like his own person. Like if you see him in interviews, he's just like, I'm really into astrology and stuff. Care. So I think he was a Gemini like me, and he was a Scorpio rising. So he had a lot of darkness and just wackiness to him.
Well, the cool thing was like for a pop star, he was probably the most experimental pop star that ever got to be like at number one, because he didn't really care about. He ended up getting the number one, but he really didn't care about being number one. He cared about the music, and so if the music happened to click with the people, then it would be number one. But once he was out of sync with the people, then he wasn't being number one anymore. But you know, that's what happened to Kurt Cobain, like you talked about.
That's all just like celebrity stuff, though. You know, it's like if you're, and the way I see it is like when you're writing, and this is just from my personal experience, like with this last album I put out, it was all just probably the most like raw that like I ever wrote, and the most real, and the response to it has been like incredible. Like I've been getting like nothing but amazing feedback. I've been selling physical copies of the CD, which is like awesome, because I was hesitant to even make them. So I'm like, who buys CDs anymore? I love CDs, but I don't think anyone buys them anymore. But yet they're selling. So I'm like, it's I feel like when I got more just real and you know, allowed myself to do that, and I didn't follow like any formula when it came to writing, especially like on the last track of the album, 28 Guns. That was heavily actually inspired after watching Pink Floyd's Echoes, how it kind of goes like up and down, and it goes into this whole groove, and it's just like that's where that came from for me. So I didn't want to follow any specific formula, and it's just, I feel like once you just let yourself be free with that, then people are going to respond to that because there's a deeper connection with that, you know?
Yeah, well, that's why, I mean, I've talked to bands that have like producers and they want to be like on the track to be like the next pop star. So they try to get people to give them, you know, a 21 Pilots sound, or they want to get like a popular band of the day. They want to get that sound, and they try to get the same writing and the same production. But what I find with a lot of indie alternative bands I talk to is kind of like it's about like who they are as a songwriter, and they just want to be honest, you know, and they get an audience because of their honesty. You know, your audience, when you're kind of like, I grew up with college radio, like, you know, with REM, and REM kind of created their own genre. And when they were writing, like nothing sounded like them. You know, they used Rickenbackers like the Byrds, but they didn't sound like the Byrds. They had this different sound, and people couldn't even tell what Michael Stipe was saying on the IRS records. But they felt the energy, and they felt this was different. And then, you know, they got signed to Warner's, and they got super big. And nobody would ever thought that an indie alternative band with a guy that kind of mumbles the lyrics and you can't really hear what they are. They would tell, every producer would say, "Well, that's not going to work. That's not going to work."
I was watching a thing about Marilyn Manson too yesterday, just like how when he first got started, and just like every label was like, "Oh my God, like no," you know, and it's just funny because now it's like he's like an iconic figure, you know, of like the 90s. And I feel like if Manson tried to come out today, I don't know if he would make it, because I feel like at the time, the 90s was still like this period of like, there wasn't really much like shock rock going on, and he was like shock rock.
Yeah, Alice Cooper. Yeah, the Alice Cooper of the day. I mean, he had kind of dropped off this kind of shock stuff that Alice had done. You know, and then some of the like the real death metal bands, you know, they were in a niche, but Alice had gotten that really big thing, you know, Iron Maiden, live too, Alice and Cooper, you know, actually.
Years ago.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, I was drawn into that stuff because I was just listening to a bunch of Frank Zappa, you know, and the Mothers of Invention. That's really, you know, I'm into like Parliament Funkadelic, and the Mothers of Invention and Parliament Funkadelic are kind of way out there in terms of like they're not super popular, but Parliament Funkadelic is the basis of all hip hop. Like almost every hip hop producer in the 90s and early 80s, they sampled Parliament Funkadelic because that is the basis of a lot of hip hop.
You know,
So,
hip hop is one of those things like I actually never really got into 100%. There's definitely like some hip hop songs I'm into, but I don't know. I never really got into it. I don't know. I try.
But I'm saying, like, yeah, but it's just interesting that the bands, you know, they're kind of like, were really kind of out there musically, like, you know, the Zappa and the Mothers of Invention and Parliament Funkadelic. The reason, you know, they're kind of groove oriented, and they mix jazz with funk and classical structures, and so those bands are very kind of out there in terms of like really being pushing the envelope. And so they're interesting when you sample from them. If you're a band that samples, those samples are very interesting, and they're not well known except for the people that love that music. So you can find grooves, and so the whole thing about hip hop is all groove oriented. And so when you have bands that are heavy groove oriented, then they tend to get sampled a lot. So that's where that comes from. But yeah, so let me back into my whole question. So we were talking about your influences. We already kind of talked about Nine Inch Nails and The Cure and Kate Bush and other bands, and like bands like you know, like we were talking about, you know, the New Order and Depeche Mode. But your new sound is kind of like a modern interpretation of that, and it's kind of cross genre. So maybe you can talk about like you're doing your own thing, but I can hear your influences, and you're not like taking a carbon copy of those influences. I can hear where you're coming from.
Like so maybe usually when I do a lot of the songs, like this album too, I was listening to a lot of Massive Attack and Portishead as well, who I really got into, and I loved like their chill, like slowed down type of beats, and I wanted to take something like that but like do it even like just more darker and like harder. So I can tell you, like, even Alice in Chains is like a huge influence on my.
Oh, the grunge! I can hear
Alice in Chains and Depeche Mode. As far as like their synth layers and everything go, I'm all about layers and texture, and I feel like a lot of music that gets put out today lacks so much depth and that whole structure. I mean, the reason why I fell in love with Depeche Mode is because they had so many layers in their songs and different sounds, and it kind of wrapped around you, you know, and that's what I was trying to do with my music, is have it just be this music that just kind of wraps around, and it's not like right in your face, and it's not like empty, and it's not repetitive, you know. And the whole thing is like a concept album, really, from start to finish. There's a whole story. It's, you know, but I leave it all up to interpretation. You know, I have my own story to it, but everyone else is open to interpret.
But I like how some of your songs, like Touch, has this kind of like it's very quiet at the beginning. You kind of open it up, and that's kind of the kind of hallmark of like progressive rock bands. If you go back, you know, whether you like a band like Yes or Genesis, but they used to start songs off with that kind of, you know, crazy. Yeah, they would start things off, and it would, you know, be 10-minute songs. You know, you have 9-minute songs. They like 28 Guns. That's very progressive.
That, like I said, that one specifically, like we were probably listening to so much Pink Floyd echoes before making that, because I just was obsessed.
That's rock
Live in
opera.
Pompeii. That video is just, I'm obsessed with it.
But it's weird because, you know, today a lot of bands, like if I look at your song lengths, you know, a lot of bands, they have 2-minute songs, 1 minute, 50-second songs, 3 minutes. Your songs, you have a 5-minute and a 9-minute, and then a lot of them are over 4 minutes. And again, today's even music formula, that where everybody's in their DAW, they're in Ableton, they're in Pro Tools, not that, you know, and they kind of use the grid, and they kind of just, you know, go with, like, it seems like, you know, I don't know if I try to equate it, but if you go back to the 50s, in the 50s, you had the kind of like bubblegum era of people did like the 2-minute, 3-minute pop song, and maybe it didn't really mean that much. It very catchy, very structured. Tons of bands had the same structure, same story, about your girlfriend or your boyfriend, whatever. It wasn't really deep, and very, very catchy. And then you get to the 60s and the Beatles open it up with Sgt. Pepper, and then suddenly all these other bands like Pink Floyd and other bands start realizing what you can do with the album, and that you can actually say something, and it doesn't have to be boy girl
Do you ever see
romance.
Pink Floyd's like early
it could be.
videos with Sid?
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm into their original stuff, before they got big, with their original lineup, and they were total psychedelic band, yeah, totally experimental, not pop oriented at all.
Waters. I mean, to me, Roger Waters is Pink Floyd. After anything after Waters, I don't listen to, honestly, because I'm just so like, I love Animals, The Wall.
Yeah, well, Roger is is like Pete Townsend to the Who.
Just got a warped mind.
He's the idea
cynical, maniacal man.
Yeah, well, he's the idea man. I mean, he has all the ideas. I mean, all the rock operas come from him. Wish You Were Here, Animals, the Wall. All these ideas, they're his ideas. And when you don't have him, you get Pink Floyd songs that are like, they're not structured in terms of concepts. They don't have the concept, gets lost. It's not there. Even if they try to do it, they don't have his literary capability. I mean, he's a great writer.
The Wall is like probably one of the best, in my opinion, like one of the best rock albums ever made. I love Dark Side of the Moon, but The Wall to me is just like.
Well, Wall is a full concept. So it's like the Dark Side of the Moon was like he was trying to do it, and Wish We Were Here is a concept. But The Wall shows like the development of him as a writer.
Amazing albums too. It's so hard to like pick and choose,
Well, it depends on what day, because sometimes Wish You Were Here because it's talking about Syd Barrett, and it's very personal, and you could say, well, it depends on your mood. That album really does say a lot.
I was at a bar
but
in Long Island, and it was like one of those bars on the water, and it was just this like, these guys just playing cover at this like place called the Lazy Lobster, and I just yelled out, I was like, play Pink Floyd, and they went into Shine On You Crazy Diamond, which I was like shocked, because usually you say, play Pink Floyd, they're gonna play
Pink Floyd, they won't play that
like, but they went into Shine On, and I was like, what? They played it for like a good.
That's like if they played Pigs on the Wing. You usually don't get Pigs on the Wing. You don't usually get anything from Animals.
I was at a bar recently, and I put Dogs on, and the woman actually cut it off, because I guess there's like kind of like that quiet part like in the middle, but then it goes into the whole like amazing.
Yeah, they can't stand it. It's too experimental.
It off on me, and I was like, "Did she?" Listen, when I go to the jukebox, I purposely buy like the longest songs to get my money's worth. And she turned it off on me, and I was like, "Did she really just do that?"
What? Yeah, why'd you have to do that?
Lady, just let it play.
That's crazy. Yeah, but what I like about what you're doing is like, and I see a lot more bands. The last couple of bands I've talked to, like I talked to a band from Australia, and they were talking about Floyd, and they were talking about like concept albums. They were talking about like Tommy and Quadrophenia. And it seems like more bands are kind of appreciating the idea that even though we're in this kind of Spotify playlist era where people just jump around, and they people don't have the patience to listen to an album, but what I found is like in the indie world, in the bands like the band like who I'm talking to you now, is all the artists that in this space are doing things where the fans want kind of what you're doing. They want to get a singer-songwriter that has a vision, and they're willing to buy your project. They'll buy your CD. They'll buy your merch. They'll see your show. They really want to get back to that, where they just don't want to have a playlist experience. They want to see an artist and hear what they have to say.
Music was just my therapy, and it still is, but like, like I said, angsty teenager, I'm sure everyone's got a story, and I had some real crazy, effed up years. I'm trying to not curse so much. I dropped the F-bomb too much, so pardon me.
Well, that's all right. We don't have a problem.
I don't want to look like, a foul-mouthed woman here. No, I'm kidding. It's like, so for me, like, I got into another favorite band of mine too, is Queens of the Stone Age. there's Nine Inch Nails. Yeah, Nine
Oh
Inch
yeah,
Nails,
that's a
Kings of
great
the
band.
Stone Age,
That's a great band.
Slipknot was like my freaking. It was my Bible. That music, you know, like it was what I connected to, and I would put those CDs on start to finish, and it was just it spoke to me, and it still does to this day, you know. And I think that a lot of um, the reason why I think my album's been getting the response it's been getting is because I connect kind of with a little bit of everyone. I think I connect with those teenagers that like need that music that's going to speak to them in a more deeper way or a darker way. And you know, my music also, I feel like it's just, you know, people that are like, yeah, like in their 50s love it because they can hear Pink Floyd references and stuff like that. So
Oh yeah. Well, I hear your
yeah.
Nine Inch Nails. I hear the going back to like the Joy
Mhm.
Division, New Order sound. And I'm like I said, I grew up liking
Yeah.
bands like the Clash. I loved like
Mhm.
the Sex Pistols, and I liked the Susie and the Banshee. I was like really into the
Same.
CBGB kind of
Yeah.
scene. Those kind of bands that really were like had that kind of raw power.
Yeah.
Even like Iggy and the Stooges. The kind of raw power that you get from what I call the punk aesthetic. The punk aesthetic is what Kurt Cobain and Pearl Jam and Alice in Chains and Soundgarden, they brought
Yeah.
that back because it always comes back. You'll get like a period where you'll get like a new wave, you get the Duran Durans, you get all that, you get the hair bands, but
Yeah.
then you got Kurt and you've got Hole and you've got Alice in Chains because people wanted
Mhm.
something that was raw
Yeah.
and honest and kind of that kind of format where you come out with
Totally.
that raw power. There's nothing like it. I think that when I hear that, it
I
always
mean,
invigorates
I
me.
what was I gonna say? Oh, look, I'm totally having like a brain fart while I'm doing an interview. That's great. No, what I was gonna say is that, you know, it's just I feel like a lot of the music that's just put out there, you know, can be very disconnecting sometimes, you know, and
Well, it seems kind of corporate, not to put down, but sometimes it seems like there's like a
well, yeah,
manufactured,
yeah,
top
and I think it's
50
gotten
thing going
worse,
on,
you know.
and you get this. Yeah, you got the same producers. And I know I'm a musician and producer, and I'll get these requests
Yeah.
from some of the companies I work with, and they'll say, sound like this band,
But you
sound
see,
like this song.
that's not.
And
But hey, listen, when I
that's what's
remember
going on.
when Britney Spears came out, okay, I was a little kid, and I was like, I loved Britney Spears. I still love Britney Spears, but it was funny to see all those copycats that
Hmm.
came out after her, and they never succeeded. So it's
Oh
like,
yeah,
what's the
that's
point of making copycats? What happened to just original artistry?
well, that's the problem. The record industry doesn't seem to understand that, from the beginning, the Monkees were a copy of the Beatles. Badfinger was a copy of the Beatles. That the
Mm-hmm.
Beatles even made a copy of themselves, which was called Badfinger. But that's the way the
Yeah.
industry has always been. The industry has always done this thing where they burn out the genre. I mean, the disco era got burned out because every
Yeah.
band started copying a beat, and then eventually that beat was just so
You know
overused
who
that
I
it just
really got
burned it out.
into more
Um,
recently,
and
actually, was Jane's Addiction. I never really listened to them until probably like the past year.
oh, that's a
And I
great band.
love
That's
Perry
a great
Farrell
band.
because I feel like he's just so on like another planet with like the way he talks sometimes. Like there's a video of him
Oh
actually
yeah.
at Woodstock 94, and he's in Porno for Pyros and they're doing pets, and he's
Hmm.
like at the end he's like, watch out for the millennium in the year 2000 when the aliens come and rescue us, whatever he says. And I just love it. I want to live in that
He's kind of
mindset.
like,
But I
yeah.
remember seeing this old interview of him from like the early 90s, and he's like talking about how he lost his creativity because there's just so much, you know, corporate stuff that got involved. And
Garbage. Yeah, well, it's hard when you're an innovator like him.
yeah,
That he's like a Zappa. I mean, he kind of
yeah.
came from that kind of idea, from like
Mm-hmm.
Alice Cooper, Zappa, you know, Queen band, the
Mm-hmm.
bands like that have big ideas and are wanting to write something
Yeah,
that takes, it costs money. The problem is that record companies want, well, I'll get this
yeah,
producer, you should do this cover, and you should do, and they kind of want to go
right.
that way. They want to make the most money. And I understand that, but the problem is it goes against the creative, nature of a true creative artist. Is because what's going to happen when you're a creative artist, you'll do your big hit, and you usually
Yeah.
never match your biggest hit. And the record company keeps on thinking you're going to sell 8 million, right? Like your big hit, and then you drop
Right.
down to
Well, they
two, and
did
then they
that
say
with
you failed,
when Nine
right?
Inch
So
Nails
you
released The Fragile. It was number one the first week, and then it dropped the second week. And his response to that was just like, I have a solid fan base, that wanted to get it when it came out, and then they all got it, and then that was it. But they looked at that as like a failure. Meanwhile, it's like, come on, The Fragile is like another one of those amazing albums that Nine Inch Nails has just put out that's like
yeah,
definitive. And when Kate Bush, David Gilmour actually discovered Kate Bush when she was like 15, and at the time they actually allowed her to develop her artistry and everything in her music for like 2 years. And it's like I don't think you hear about that
yeah.
today. And Kate Bush is one of those artists. Mm-hmm.
A record company, they'll never put that kind of money. They'll take somebody that
Mm-hmm.
developed themselves on
Yeah, it's
YouTube
very
and
different.
then bring them
So
in.
my goal with everything is obviously I want to be playing to masses. I want to play to anyone that wants to come see me play, because it's all about, for me, when it comes to writing music, it's all about making that connection with the people that are listening to it and wanting them to just be a part of this dark, as I say, my dark, gritty noir world that I envision in my brain when I'm writing and performing. And, I think,
So maybe, yeah.
sorry, go ahead.
So maybe get, yeah. I wanted to talk a little bit about your
Mm-hmm.
performance because I've seen some of your videos, and the description is like you've got like I can see the Bowie
Mm-hmm.
influence and the Alice Cooper influence, and your stage show you're not trying, you are doing that stagecraft that is very theatrical. So maybe you can talk
Yeah.
about like your stage show and your theatrical
Well,
aspects
so a
of your
lot of
performance.
the performance videos I've been sharing is I was doing for the past, like, I guess over a year now. I started doing burlesque around Manhattan, and it was just another creative outlet for me while I was writing this album to just kind of stay creative. I love performing, I love being on stage, and I once the second I got into it, it felt very natural to just be able to express myself with music that I grew up on and loved. So definitely when I've performed, I haven't done an album release show yet just because it got canceled due to everything going on right now. But when my past
Yeah.
previous performances, I've always just been a theatrical person. I've had dancers with me on stage. I've had just props and stuff like that. And this with this album, it's all about visuals. So I've been making visual videos to project behind me that all correspond with the song. And I'm so inspired by watching light shows that people are able to put on, and I'm just like, I want to emulate that in my performances because it's all about that atmosphere you create. But with my burlesque acts, I definitely get a little crazy. I mean, I've done Marilyn Manson shows, Typo Negative, Nine Inch Nails, so it's all, I'm all inspired by that. So when I go on stage and I do burlesque, I'm not even
Yeah.
like, it's almost like an out of body experience. It's strange. It's like I don't even, I'm like an autopilot. It just comes naturally. And then I watch the video back and I'm like, holy crap, what did I just do?
Well, it's kind of like if you think about what Bowie, he
Yeah.
would become Ziggy, right? And he would become the Thin White Duke.
Yeah.
And then
It's
Alice Cooper,
straight.
he
It's
became
like,
Alice.
yeah, it just
And it's like
consumes
another
you.
example of that.
I don't know how to describe it, but it feels very natural because I
Yeah.
feel good when I'm up there. And when I move and dance and everything, it's not really a choreographed. It's all just, it just does, it just happens.
That's interesting. I've talked to some artists, right? They don't have like a stage persona per se. They don't become like another person. Like you see Alice
Mm-hmm.
or you see Bowie or see Lady Gaga or even like Madonna. They,
Yeah,
they they became this other me, this
totally.
other version of themselves. And And I find like even with the artists that say they don't, they really do. Like if you go on your stage persona, even if you're wearing blue jeans and just a shirt, right? The stage persona of a rock star, is not exactly who they are in private. So they might try to say, well, that's their authentic me, but it doesn't really look, they don't act the same way. Everybody has kind of like this mask, and some people, do a level of theatrics that's way beyond who they are. It actually becomes like they're being a method actor,
Well, it's
and they
funny
kind of
because a
fall
girl
into it.
told me that
And
after
even
I got done
yeah,
performing one of my shows, I made up this character called Lolita La Lucifer, and she was a mixture of Lolita, Stanley Kubrick's Lolita, who was doing a sacrifice of a man. So that was the character I created, and it's funny because it involved a lot of fake blood or real blood. I guess we'll never know. But the girl told me on the side of the stage, she's like,
mm-hmm.
it's so funny. She's like, you go on stage and you're so dark, and you're like you do like scary stuff, and then when you talk to you, you're just very bubbly and like happy. And I'm like, that's just me. I'm like such like a peace loving hippie child at heart. Uh you know I'm I
Mm-hmm.
like to think I'm very respectful and nice towards everyone, and I believe in karma. Be nice to others, you'll get that back. But when I go on stage, it's like that's where I can just be this other, like I said, I'm a Gemini, so I got this kind of split thing. I got like this
Yeah,
one
yeah, you got
side,
that. Yeah,
and
yeah, the yin
yeah, I
yin
got
and
this
the yang.
other just
It's
side
like
that needs to come out, and
you
if
know,
I don't let it come out, I go crazy.
well, that's like when I have my own stage persona. If you've ever seen,
Mhm.
like Josephine Electric is me.
Mhm.
She's the lead singer of my band, and she's the female part of me. I use a vocoder to actually, become Josephine Electric, who is the
Uh-huh.
lead singer of my band,
Yeah.
Fam Electric Ghost. It was a band full of ghosts, and the idea is like we're kind of like the
Yeah.
Gorillas. We got characters in the band, and I kind
Right.
of play another version of me. And when the whole people I said, well, why don't you just do it straight? And then this whole quarantine thing, I've been doing
Yeah.
shows where I just am myself without my gear, without my mask, without my stuff, just because it's kind of this kind of time period. I was like, okay, I'll kind of
Right.
I'll
Yeah.
show you like an unplugged version of me. um, but when I do a show in New York or Boston, I'm in my full gear, and
I
I
mean, it's
become like this
therapeutic in
character
its own
Josephine,
sense, you know.
and, and
I can't imagine
yeah.
not doing any type of performance. Like I said, I've been doing it for probably now, like, I don't know, 10 years, and it's just I'm gonna be making music no matter what. I'll be making music till I'm like
Yeah.
90 probably.
So when we come out of the quarantine, you've got all these
Yeah,
visuals
I
that you're
mean,
going to
I was
use for your
rehearsing
stage
for
show.
it with the guitarist and drums and all that, but it was supposed to be April 4th, and we had to, obviously cancel. But I am hoping that once this all ends and it's all safe to come out, that it's gonna get even more people out because we've been locked away for so long.
Oh yeah. Well, I think you think it's going to be pretty big for the artists when we come back out. There's going to be a
Hmm.
lot of people who are music fans that are itching to
Yeah.
go back into the festival club scene. They're going to want to see a lot of bands, and I think they're also going to want to
Hmm.
see bands that actually have something to say. you know, they're going to be kind of a little bit more looking for maybe escapism and people coming up with
Yeah.
ideas like rock opera type ideas, or album oriented. I think people are
I
going
had
to be
people
looking for
tell me
stuff that
that
has a little
my
deeper
album is
meaning.
like exactly what I
Um,
needed right now, and I'm just like perfect. Because honestly, I was a little hesitant at first because I released it
that's cool.
on March 21st, and that was probably like I think what a week or two into this whole lockdown situation, and I was hesitant, but I said screw it. I mean, like,
Mm-hmm.
why not? I mean, one thing's for sure.
Yeah,
I know everybody is going to be home on their computers, so I can promote it easily. But two, I think it's
yeah.
good to just put that out there because some people just need that outlet. They need a new outlet that's going to inspire them or just help them during all of this, you know?
So I think what's interesting, because I've talked to some bands that said, well, I'm going to hold off because I kind of want my album to go with my tour. And so they don't want to do it. But I've seen other bands say, you know what? The world's changed. So I'm actually going to put out like 2 albums and tons of singles and go on Twitch and go on Facebook Live. And they've been doubling down on saying, you know what? I'm actually going to put out more content. And maybe I'll come up with a different album when I go on tour, but I'm going to try to go all out
album,
because everything.
I've written a bunch of songs and started off on bass. I got lyrics, so my studio where I record is in Brooklyn, so I'm not going back there until pretty much all this clears up. But I've got the skeleton of it down, I guess you could say. So.
Do you have a home recording
like
studio, or you mostly go
home,
to your studio?
I can really just what I do at home more like demo stuff, and then when I go into the
real
studio, I can really just get down
to
the nitty gritty.
Well, I live in New Hampshire, so we have a lot of studios around. So I'm like a bedroom producer with tons of gear.
The great thing about that is like it's easy with Pro Tools and all that. You can just you don't have to worry about renting out a studio.
Well, I kind of double down. I'm a DAWless producer. I use nothing but analog digital hardware synths with actual digital recorders. And I kind of use what Tascam, and Zoom R24s, 24 track recorders, and I kind of do it old school, but then I don't have to, I have a distribution deal with 2 labels, and I pretty much do most of my own. I have recording engineers that take my stuff, but most of my stuff is totally done in my home studio, and I've been able to put it out, and I invested in that in the last 5 years, and it was kind of really cool because I've been doubling down, and I've put out, tons of material, and I don't really have to wait. So it's just something, as a keyboardist, I kind of like, okay, I need these keyboards. I can't just go to the studio all the time. So I invested in them.
If I had already performed my album, then I would probably be into doing more live stream stuff. But because I haven't performed any of this yet, I'd rather hold off because, you always want the first experience to be.
So you want to hold off.
It's not the same, being, live stream can only go so far, but everybody misses the energy of being in a room together and seeing a show,
So if you thought like your live performance, because you kind of become your character, you become your stage presence. Have you thought because the way you do your work, does an unplugged version not work for you because of the way you have to you present yourself? You wouldn't think
and it's funny, it could be done for sure. I've never really done unplugged. I remember actually one of the shows I did in Manhattan was at the Duplex, and there was this huge piano on the stage, and it was going to be in the way the whole time anyway, so I was like, let me just use this, and I did piano driven versions of Heart-Shaped Box, Blue Monday, and Nobody Home, Pink Floyd The Wall. But I've always wanted to go back and do that again, because I think that my songs for sure could be done on piano or acoustic. It's just, I'm so into just the atmosphere that I feel like I created with the sound. And, going back, because you mentioned character, I don't even think that what I do on stage is a character. It's really just me, but it's just again, it's that side of me that lives within me that can only really come out when I'm on stage, because like I said, it's like autopilot. I don't know, maybe it's like a demonic possession I'm unaware of or something, but
well, it's like the muse coming through you,
know,
and it's like the other me being part of what I do with my
sacrificed me to the Illuminati as a kid, and that's my demonic energy coming in. Who knows? But it's there.
Well, I take this concept from romantic poetry, like Wordsworth and all these romantic poets used to talk about the looking glass, which is a mirror. And when you look in that mirror, you see the other me, right? And the other me is like Ziggy, you know, or it's the Thin White Duke, or it's Lady Gaga. When they look in that mirror,
Yeah.
that's the other me. And so it's
I
really,
think
it's
everybody
you,
needs to find
but
that
it's that
too,
other you,
because I
you
think
know?
people get too wrapped up in uh, the idea of routine, and then when you get too wrapped up in routine, you get kind of scared to maybe go outside the box a little bit and discover things maybe about yourself or other things, whether they're weird or dark or unsettling or whatever it may be. I mean, I'm a huge, like, David Lynch is probably my favorite director, and
Oh, yeah.
yeah, and his
Yeah,
stuff
Twin
is
Peaks and
just
all
so far
everything he
out
did with,
there.
you know,
And it's
about,
like
yeah.
David Lynch is like this, like when you hear him talk, he talks very just, he's like this, and he's just so positive, and he meditates, and he's just got this great way of thinking. But then you see his artwork, and it's like so dark, and it's freaky, and but it's got so much meaning behind
Yeah,
it. And
it's
I
like,
think that everybody needs some type of creative outlet, no matter what it is, music, that.
yeah, it's like kind of like
Yeah,
Kubrick's
love
A Clockwork
Kubrick.
Orange. That's super dark, you know. That's kind of like a lot like Lynch's work is kind of like Clockwork Orange, kind of like
Yeah,
um, it has that kind of vibe, and I've always been kind of drawn to the kind of idea. I know I have this idea with my
yeah,
character Josephine that she's a psychic vampire, that she's a phantasm, and she kind of pulls the energy from people. She's not exactly like
yeah.
a physical
Those actually
vampire. She's a
exist, I
psychic
think.
vampire, and she kind of pulls. Yeah. Well, the
Yeah.
idea is like she kind of pulls people's karma,
Hey, listen,
and it
I've
kind
ran into a
of
lot
comes
of
back on
energy
them.
vampires that just suck the life out of you. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
It kind of throws it back at him, though. But that's the idea of her character. But it's just, yeah, you know, when you're an artist, you come up with like where are you coming
Yeah.
from, you know, as an artist, what are you going to use? And you know, a lot of artists, they use, you know, pain. You know, you use personal tragedies or, you know, personal experiences to kind of drive what you do. So you take things that you have in your life, and maybe you
Yeah.
exaggerate it or change it a little bit. But a lot of it comes from
Yeah.
like your own experiences, and you make it relatable. And I think that's why people like music, because even if you didn't, you know, they interpret your song to be something about
Listen,
what happened
I
to them,
love.
even though it happened to you.
I was gonna say
You
I
know, your
love
fans will
love
take something.
like I said, I love pop music, and pop music can be very just like one layer and easy, but that's fun and all, and I love that stuff, and I like to experiment with all different genres, and but when it comes down to just writing, I noticed that all of my writing just always is going to just come from personal experiences, and a lot of them are painful, and there's happy moments too, of course, but for me, I feel like I always say, like, I lived like 10 lives in 10 years. Like, I've got stories that you wouldn't believe that will eventually come out when I'm ready to just talk more openly about stuff like that. But it's like, it's almost like this album was taking all of that in the last 10 years and just wrapping it up into this. And it's amazing because when you can write, I mean, I always just tell people, even if you're not a writer or a musician, nothing, it's just so good just to write and just get what is out on your mind on paper. It doesn't have to rhyme. I've got notebooks where it's just like literal, just like scribblings of just whatever's coming to mind, boom, and I write it down. And it's so therapeutic. So when I write a song, it's like exercising a demon in a sense, it's just getting that out, and then once I have it, it's like, cool, now I can move on to the next subject to write about.
Yeah, well, I was always drawn to this kind of idea. I was always, you know, looking at Dylan, and Dylan
Yeah.
used to do a lot of stream of consciousness, and then he would have all this stuff he was recording, have the guys turn the mic on. He just kind of, you know, he would read all this
Yeah.
stuff. He'd read all this romantic poetry and
I read
Italian,
a lot of
you
poetry too. I got a
know,
lot of
stuff, all
poetry
these
books on
great
my
books, and then
nightstand.
yeah, and you take all that and you kind of do a stream of consciousness and you let it go, and then it kind of,
Yeah.
you let your mind take out that muse, and it just becomes like, it just becomes like a therapy. You're basically healing yourself by taking your pain and turning it into art. And I think every painter, every musician, every actor takes that and they use it to create their art, and that's how you channel that and you create
David
something
Bowie, this interview with David Bowie in the 90s, and he talks about how being an artist, like you kind of have to being an artist, you're not completely 100% like sane, and and he's right. And I always said to myself, I said, why do I have this desire to just go on stage and perform and like, work with blood and just, get crazy and just let go like that? And it's like you have what is it, that desire that makes us want to do that? And it's like, I wouldn't say it's a normal thing, but it's just.
Well, I think all creatives kind of pull a little bit of
Totally.
You're a little off balance. Like to be a creative, because you're making decisions, you're investing in stuff, and people would like, as a musician, people would say, why are you going to invest in these synthesizers? Why are you going to invest in it?
Right.
Every musician will invest in their tools of what they do, right? And people would always tell you, well, you should go put that money in an IRA, or you should go do this. The logical thing would be to go put it away in an investment and buy, do this and be like, the average American person, right? But then creative people, we can't do that because we're gonna go and maybe take a risk, put an investment in ourselves that other people are not going to understand because they're not creative, so they don't see why you would want to buy a guitar, why you'd pay for studio time, why would you do that? They can't put it together, and so we're always going to be kind of,
I could never.
What are you doing?
I'm not a 9-to-5er. I mean, I do, I freelance. I actually, my mortal income was, makeup artistry, which was very rewarding to me. But, when I tried to do corporate for a bit, it was terrible. I lost all my creativity. I was in front of a computer, texting, phones, emails, it was like around the clock like that. And I was drained. And I just went back to freelancing again. And, it's hard because it was like, some weeks maybe I'd work 1 day a week. Some weeks maybe it's 4 days a week. It was just always all over the place. But I somehow always managed to just get by and, not be homeless on the streets or anything like that, But I always wonder, like, where am I going to be 40 years from
hard.
now, And all I ever say to myself is just, I'm going to be making music. Maybe I'll be living down in New Orleans, playing some blues music or whatever. I don't care. I need creativity in my life.
Yeah, we have to go. Creative people always have to kind of go where our muse takes us, and it's like, it's not the normal like 9-to-5 thing. Like I'm a freelance too. I'm a like technology guy, right? But I can't stand being in a cubicle, so I'm always doing like work from home or remote stuff, or I'll do a gig for 6 months and do something, and be able to do the rest of the year doing my music.
Because my fan base has been really growing in the UK, and I really just have a good feeling about the UK, and I would really love. Yeah, my plan is to just get some club gigs there and book some shows, and I've never even been over there, so take a vacation and perform.
Well, the BBC plays a lot of stuff. They play multiple genres. They have shows that have, Jules Holland and stuff. They have shows that allow people from multiple bands, multiple genres to be on the same show. The same network, their radio has like every genre. And they let indie bands. I mean, there are bands from Boston that go down there. Bands from Hendrix had to go to London to get found.
I forgot that he opened up, I think, for the Monkees, didn't he?
Yeah, well, he originally went to London because the band The Animals, one of the band members, a guy named Chad Chandler, saw him playing at in New York, and brought him to London, and then invited like Paul McCartney and George Harrison, Eric Clapton, all these big guys. to see him. Yeah, well, they all saw him play like in London, and they all got blown away. Eric Clapton, when he saw Hendrix, he said he had to stop playing guitar for like a month because he said like I'm all done because Hendrix like blew me out of the water, and it's just like he had to get found there, and then he came in back through the jazz festival, the Montreux Jazz Festival, and that's how he got discovered. But he had been playing on what they call the Chitlin circuit. He'd been playing behind like Little Richard and Isley Brothers, like from the like 64, 65, 66. I have some of those songs. Wow. He used to play behind all the great soul acts, but then they would fire him because he would hot dog it, and they said, "Well, you're trying to be the star." Like Little Richard kicked him out of his band and said, "There's only one star in my band, it's me." And it's funny because the Isley Brothers did the same thing. All these big soul acts he was playing behind as the rhythm guitarist.
Sorry to cut you off,
but he couldn't get any traction.
Did you ever see the old videos of Trent Reznor in a band called you have to go on YouTube and type in Trent Reznor Slam Bamboo, and it's a video of this like 80s band, so 80s, like the hair, the clothes. But then Trent Reznor's playing synth, dressed in all black, and during this time he was actually writing Pretty Hate Machine. But he must have just been playing these gigs, for money. Mm-hmm. And it's so, oh my God, it's like so funny because he just looks so out of place and it's awkward and like doesn't want to be there.
Yeah, that's what happens. Yeah, I mean, sometimes you end up being, where you don't want to be, but you have to do it to get the money. And yeah, like that's a great decision to do. I mean, I'm looking into, like, I had an invite to go to France, the south of France one time to play this gig. And then I wasn't able to do it, but it was like that, playing in another country. I actually was in Tokyo in 2004 to 2006. And the Japanese audience is unbelievable. Like if you ever get, Tokyo is unbelievable. Like if you ever get to play there, it's one of the best places to play as a musician because the fans are totally into you. They're different though. They don't get super excited. And so you might be like, oh, I don't know if they're digging me, but they do dig you. And they're very loyal, and they'll actually know your name. They'll know all kinds of information about you, and you're like, what?
That's definitely on my list too. I said, like, I want to go to UK. I want to go to Berlin. I'd love to see Tokyo and just play shows there because I think that the more alternative
Berlin's good too.
Culture of music is like thriving there still,
Yeah, well, that's what and Bowie did all that low and all their great, those really experimental Bowie albums like Heroes and Low. Those are the Berlin time period when he was working with Eno and all these guys. That stuff is like I still am totally drawn into that. I probably listen to Low all the time.
Hanging up on my wall.
Well, I love Eno. I mean, Eno is such a great producer. That's the kind of producer I like because that's the kind of producer. He takes what you have and then he makes it better. And he doesn't like ignore what you're doing, but he actually just like embellishes what you're doing. And it doesn't feel like he's just changing you to change you. He makes you a better artist, and that's the kind of producer I've always been drawn to, people that do that. I actually got to work with some people on his team on a song I did for a label called Mojo Heads. And they had one of his guys like take one of my songs, and they just adjusted it in such a way. They did things with my song. They just time shifted things. They moved things around, like the way he does stuff. And it's just, that was such a cool thing to see how they do things. And that's the kind of producer I've always been. Like, don't be a destructive producer. Be a producer that makes you like feel like you're getting embellished, and that you don't lose your original ideas. But so this has been cool. And one of the things we like to do with our show is like when you're ready to go out on the road or present more material, we have people come back. We've had bands come back 2-3 times to like do reveals on the new material or new things they're working on, whether it's just a single or a whole new EP or a whole album or videos or whatever. We have people come back. So Yeah, we're very happy to have you on, Tryst, and we're gonna actually put the link to your Spotify and
It's
to
gonna be on Apple
your main
Music soon
website,
too. It's gonna be on
and
Apple
this will
Music.
go
There's an
out on the
error,
left.
but it will be there soon.
Oh, that's cool. Well, we're on all the platforms. Our
Oh,
podcast is
cool.
on 11 platforms, including Apple and Spotify. We actually are part of the
Nice.
Spotify family because Anchor is part of Spotify. Um, but we do actually still work with Apple, and our podcast will be on Apple, it will be on Google, it will be on Radio Public and Overcast. And like I said, there are 11 platforms that we're on. I will send you the links after this. It would take me like up to an hour. It might come out sooner to get this ready to be out there. But yeah, we're happy to have you on, Tryst, and we're hoping that we're actually, as the Ghost,
Oh
we
yes, I
play
used to
in New
go there
York. We
quite
played at
often.
Blackthorn 51. We played,
I played there, I think,
yeah,
twice
we
myself.
played in a couple places, and yeah, I played twice in 2017, and I'm looking forward to getting back. I actually
Oh my
had a
God, is
show that I
that
was
place
supposed to
still
do at
around?
Fat
I had
Baby
one
in
of my
Manhattan.
first gigs there with my old band.
Uh, Yeah, a couple of years ago, I mean, I did something there, but I don't know if they're still around. But yeah, I love New York, and I live in
Yeah.
New Hampshire, but New York is where I have to play because people around here just want to hear folk music, and so the kind of music I play is like there's tons of places in New York where I get to play. So one day you might see me in New York again when they lift the quarantine. But yeah, I would love to see your show. So when you're out there, like maybe I'll get out there and see one of your shows. But
For having me.
yeah, it's really cool to have you on. And again, we'll put this out to everybody, and everybody go out to Spotify, go out to Apple once it's out there.
I'm all over the place.
Are you on
Just
Amazon
type
too?
in Tryst Vulgar Virtue and you will find me.
Okay, great. Like any platform out there, please download, purchase, buy, do everything possible to support indie artists. Because a lot of indie artists aren't able to tour right now. So anything you can do to help them on their social media and what they're selling and what they're doing, please do that. We've told everybody that listens to a band on this show, please support the bands that we talk to.
Awesome. Thanks for
So
having
we'll
me. Have a
talk to
good
you
night.
later. Thank you very much for being on the show.